The Enchanted Wood by Enid Blyton. Chapter 5. The Roundabout Land. One big broad branch slanted upwards at the top of the faraway tree. Joe climbed onto it and looked down, but he could see nothing, for a white mist swirled around and about. Above him, the enormous thick white cloud stretched, with a purple hole in it, through which the topmost branch of the faraway tree disappeared. The children felt tremendously excited. At last they were at the very top. Joe carefully pulled himself up the final branch. He disappeared into the purple hole. Beth and Franny followed him. The branch came to an end and a little ladder ran up through the cloud. Up the children went, and before they knew what had happened, they were out in the sunshine in a new and very strange land. They stood on green grass. Above them was a blue sky. A tune was playing somewhere, going on and on and on. "It's the sort of tune a carousel or a roundabout plays, Joe, isn't it?" said Beth. It was. And then suddenly, without any warning at all, the whole land began to swing around. Children almost fell over with the swing round beginning so suddenly. "What's happening?" said Beth, frightened. The children felt terribly dizzy, for trees, distant houses, hills and bushes began to move round. They too felt themselves moving, for the grass was going round as well. They looked for the hole in the cloud, but it had disappeared. "The whole land is going round and round like a roundabout," cried Joe, shutting his eyes with dizziness. "We've passed over the hole in the clouds. We don't know where the topmost branch of the faraway tree is now. It's somewhere beneath this land, but goodness knows where." "Joe, but how can we get back home again?" cried Franny in a fright. "We'll have to ask someone for help," said Joe. The three began to walk away from the patch of green field in which they were standing. Beth noticed that they had been standing on a ring of grass that seemed darker than the grass around, and she wondered why it was. But she had no time to say anything, for really it was dreadfully difficult to walk properly in a land that was going round and round like a proper carousel all the time. The music went on and on too, hurdy-gurdy, hurdy-gurdy. Joe wondered where it came from and where the machinery was that worked the strange roundabout land. Soon they met a tall man singing loudly from a book. Joe stopped him, but he went on singing. It was annoying. "Hey diddle, ho diddle, round and round and round," shouted the man, whilst Joe tried to make himself heard. How can we get away from this land?" Joe shouted. "Don't interrupt me. Hey diddle, ho diddle," sang the man, and he beat time with his finger. Joe caught hold of the bony finger and shouted again. "Which is the way out of this land, and what land is it?" "Now you've made me lose my time," said the tall man crossly. "I shall have to begin my song again." "What is this land, please?" asked Franny. "It's Roundabout land," said the tall man. "I should have thought anyone would have guessed that. You can't get away from it. It goes round and round always, and only stops once in a blue moon." "There must have been a blue moon when we climbed into it," groaned Joe. "It had certainly stopped then." The man went off, singing loudly, "Hey diddle, ho diddle, round and round and round." "Silly old round and round," said Franny. "Really, we do seem to meet the most peculiar people." "What I'm worried about is getting home," said Beth. "Mother will be anxious if we're not back before long. What shall we do, Joe?" "Let's sit down under this tree and have a bit more to eat," said Joe. So they sat down and munched solemnly, hearing roundabout music going on all the time and watching the distant hills and trees swinging round against the sky. It was all very strange. Presently a pair of rabbits lolloped up and looked at the children. Franny loved animals. She threw a bit of cake to them. To her surprise, one of the rabbits picked up the cake in its paw and nibbled it like a monkey. "Thanks," said the rabbit. "It's a change from grass. Where do you come from? We haven't seen you before. We thought we knew everyone here. Nobody new ever comes to Roundabout Land." "And nobody ever gets away," said the other rabbit, smiling at Franny and holding out his paw for a bit of cake too. "Really?" said Beth in alarm. "Well, we are new to it, for we only came about an hour ago. We came up the faraway tree." "What?" cried both rabbits at once, flopping up their long ears in amazement. "Up the faraway tree, did you say?" Goodness, you don't mean to say that's touching this land? Yes, it is, said Beth, but I expect as this land is swinging round and round that the topmost branch might be almost anywhere underneath it. There's no way of finding out. Oh, yes, there is, said the first rabbit excitedly. If we burrow down a little way and make a hole, we can see whereabouts the faraway tree is underneath, and we can wait for it to come round again when the land swings above it. Well, we came up from the tree just where the grass was darker than the rest, said Beth. I noticed that. Do you suppose that as the roundabout land swings round, it will come back to the same place again, and we could slip down the topmost branch? Of course, said the rabbits. We can easily burrow down that green patch of grass and wait for the land to turn around just over the tree again. Come on, quickly, there's no time to lose. All of them jumped up and sped off. Beth knew the way, and so did the rabbits. Soon they were back in the field where the ring of dark grass stood. There was no opening now, leading through a cloud down to the tree. It had gone. The rabbits began to dig quickly. Soon they found the ladder that led upwards. Then they made such a big hole that the children could see down it to the large white cloud that swirled below the roundabout land. Nothing there yet, said the first rabbit, getting out a handkerchief and wiping his dirty front paws. We must wait a bit. I only hope the land hasn't swung on past the faraway tree altogether. The roundabout music went on and on. Then suddenly it began to slow down. One of the rabbits peeped out of the hole below and gave a shout. The land has stopped going round, and the faraway tree is just nearby, but we can't reach it. The children peered through the cloud below the ladder and saw quite clearly that the faraway tree was very near, but not near enough to jump on. Whatever were they to do? Now don't try to jump, warned the rabbits, or you'll fall right through the cloud. What shall we do? Asked Beth in despair. We must get on the tree before we swing away again. I've got a rope, said one of the rabbits suddenly, and put his hand into a big pocket, pulled out a yellow rope. He made a loop in one end and then threw it carefully at the topmost branch of a nearby tree. It caught and held. Good. Franny, slip down the rope first, said Joe. I'll hold this end. So Franny, rather afraid, slid down the yellow rope to the tree, and then just as she got there, the roundabout music began to play very loudly and quickly, and the roundabout land began to move. Quick, quick, shouted Franny as the land swung nearer to the faraway tree. Jump, jump. They jumped, and the rabbits jumped after them. The roundabout land swung off. The big white cloud covered everything. The children and the rabbits clung to the topmost branch and looked at one another. We look like monkeys on a stick, said Joe, and they all began to giggle. My goodness, what an adventure. I vow we don't come up here again. But as you may guess, they did. Chapter 6, Moonface and the Slippery Slip. The children clung to the top branches of the faraway tree, while the rabbits slid down a bit lower. They could still hear the enchanting music of the roundabout land as it swung around overhead. We'd better get home, said Joe in rather a quiet voice. It's been just a bit too exciting. Come on then, said Beth, beginning to climb down. It will be easier to get down than it was to climb up. But Franny was very tired. She began to cry as she clung to her branch. She was the youngest and not so strong as Joe and Beth. I shall fall, she wept. I know I shall fall. Joe and Beth looked at one another in alarm. This would never do. There was such a long way to fall. Dear Franny, you simply must try, said Joe gently. We've got to get home safely. But Franny clung to her branch and wept great tears. The two rabbits looked at her, most upset. One put his paw into her hand. I'll help you, he said. But Franny wouldn't be helped. She was tired out and afraid of everything now. She wept so loudly that two birds nearly flew off in fright. Just as the others were really in despair, a small door flew open in the trunk of the tree not far below, and a round, moon-like face looked out. Hey there, what's the matter? Shouted the moon-faced person. The fellow can't get any sleep at all with that awful noise going on. Fanny stopped crying and looked at Moonface in surprise. I'm crying because I'm frightened of climbing down the tree, she said. I'm sorry I woke you up. Moonface beamed at her. Have you got any toffee? He asked. He liked chewy, sweet things to eat. Toffee? Said everyone in surprise. What do you want toffee for? To eat, of course, said Moonface. I just thought if you had any toffee to give me, I'd let you slide down my slippery slip. You get down to the bottom very quickly that way, you know. I slide all the way down the faraway tree, cried Joe, hardly believing his ears. Good gracious, whoever would have thought of that? I thought of it, said Moonface, beaming again just like a full moon. I let people use it if they pay me toffee. Oh, said the three children, and looked at one another in dismay, for none of them had any toffee. Then Joe shook his head. We've no toffee, he said, but I've a bar of chocolate. A bit squishy, but quite nice. Won't do, said Moonface. I don't like chocolate. What about the rabbits? Haven't they got any toffee either? The rabbits turned out their pockets. They had a very curious collection of things, but no toffee. Sorry, said Moonface, and slammed his door shut. Fanny began to cry again. Joe climbed down to the door and banged on it. Hey, old Moonface, he shouted. I'll bring you some lovely homemade toffee next time I'm up the tree if you'll let us use your slippery slip. The door flew open again and Moonface beamed out. Why didn't you say so before? He asked. Come in. One by one, the rabbits and the children climbed down to the door and went in. Moonface's house in the tree was very peculiar. It was one round room, and in the middle of it was the beginning of the slippery slip that ran down the whole trunk of the tree, winding round and round like a spiral staircase. Round the top of the slide was a curved bed, a curved table, 2 curved chairs made to fit the roundness of the tree trunk. The children were astonished and wished they had time to stay for a while, but Moonface pushed them towards the slide. You want a cushion each, he said. Hey, you, rabbit, take the top one and go first. One of the rabbits took an orange cushion and set it at the top of the slide. He sat down on it looking a little nervous. Go on, hurry up, said Moonface. Don't want to stay all night, do you? He gave the rabbit a hard push, and the rabbit slid down the slippery slip at a tremendous pace, his whiskers and ears blown backwards. Joe thought it looked a lovely thing to do. He went next. He took a blue cushion, sat on it at the top of the slide, and pushed off. Down he went on his cushion, his hair streaming backwards. Round and round and round went the slippery slip inside the enormous trunk of the old tree. It was quite dark and silent and lasted a very long time, for the faraway tree was tremendously tall. Joe enjoyed every second. When he came to the bottom, his feet touched a sort of trapdoor in the trunk at the foot of the tree, and the trap flew open. Joe shot out and landed on a big tuft of green moss, which was grown there to make a soft landing place. He sat there out of breath, then he got up quickly, for he didn't want Beth or Franny landing on top of him. Beth went next. She flew down on a fat pink cushion, gasping for breath, for she went so fast. Then Franny went on a green cushion, and then the other rabbit. One by one they shot out of the little trapdoor, which closed itself tightly as soon as the slider had gone through. They all sat on the ground getting their breath and laughing, for it really was funny to shoot down inside a tree on a cushion. The rabbits stood up first. We'd better be going, they said. So pleased to have met you. They disappeared down the nearest burrow and the children waved goodbye. Then Joe stood up. Come on, he said. We really must get home. Goodness knows what the time is. Oh, what a lovely way of getting down the faraway tree that was, said Beth, jumping to her feet. It was so quick. I loved it, said Franny. I'd like to climb up the tree every single day, just so that I could slide down that super slippery slip. But what do we do with the cushions? At that moment, a red squirrel, dressed in an old jumper, came out of a hole in the trunk. Cushions, please, he said. The children gathered them up and handed them to the squirrel one by one. They were getting quite used to hearing animals talk to them now. Are you going to carry all these cushions up the tree to Moonface? Asked Franny in wonder. The squirrel laughed. Of course not. He said, Moonface lets down a rope for them. Look, here it comes. A rope came slipping down between the branches. The squirrel caught the end of it and tied the bundle of cushions firmly on the rope. He gave 3 tugs and the rope swung upwards again, taking the cushions with it. Good idea, said Joe, and then they all turned to go home, thinking as they walked of the strange and exciting things that had happened that day. They came to the ditch and jumped across. They went down the little lane and through their little back gate. By the time they reached the cottage, they were ready to drop with tiredness. Their mother was still busy in the garden and their father was not yet home. So, sleepily, Beth made them all some hot milk, which they took up to their rooms to drink while sitting in bed. I'm not going up the faraway tree again, said Franny, lying down. Well, I am, said Joe. Don't forget we promised old Moonface some homemade toffee. We can climb up to his house, give him the toffee, and slide down that slippery slip again. We don't need to go into any land at the top of the tree. But Beth and Franny were fast asleep, and very soon Joe was too, dreaming of the strange faraway tree and the curious folk who lived in its enormous trunk. Chapter 7. Beth makes some toffee for Moonface. The children talked about nothing else but the faraway tree and its strange folk for days after their adventure. Beth said they must certainly keep their promise to take Toffee to Moonface. Promises must never be broken, she said. I will make some toffee if Mother will let me have the sugar, syrup and milk. Then when it's done, you can take it to Moonface, Joe. Mother said they could make toffee on Wednesday after she'd been to the shops. So on Wednesday, Beth set to work making the best, sweetest, chewiest toffee she could. She set it in a pan on the stove. It cooked beautifully. When it had cooled and was set nice and hard, Beth broke it up into small pieces. She put them into a paper bag, gave one piece to each of the others, and popped one into her own mouth. I'll have to go at night, I think, said Joe. I shan't get any time off this week, I know. We're so busy with the garden now. So that night, when the moon was shining brightly in the sky overhead, Joe slipped out of bed. Beth and Franny woke up and heard him. They hadn't meant to go with him, but when they saw the moonlight shining everywhere and thought of that exciting faraway tree, they felt that they simply couldn't stay behind. Wouldn't you have felt that too? They dressed quickly and whispered through Joe's door, We're coming too, Joe, wait for us. Joe waited. Then all three slipped down the creaky stairs and out into the moonlit garden. The shadows were very black indeed, just like ink. There was no colour anywhere, only just the pale, cold moonlight. They were soon in the Enchanted Wood, but dear me, it was quite different now. It was simply alive with people and animals. In the very dark parts of the wood, little lanterns were hung in rows. In the moonlit parts there were no lanterns, and a great deal of chattering was going on. Nobody took any notice of the children at all. Nobody seemed surprised to see them, but the children were most astonished at everything. There's a market over there, whispered Joe to Beth. Look, there are necklaces made of painted acorns and brooches made of wild roses. But Beth was looking at something else. A dance was going on in the moonlit dell, with fairies and pixies chattering and laughing together. Sometimes when they were tired of dancing on their feet, partners would fly in the air and dance there in the moonlight. Franny was watching some elves growing toadstools. As fast as the toadstool grew, an elf laid a cloth on it and put glasses of lemonade and tiny cakes there. It was all like a strange dream. Oh, I am glad we came, said Beth in delight. Who would have thought that the Enchanted Wood would be like this at night? They wasted a great deal of time looking at everything, but at last they got to the faraway tree. And even here there was a great difference. The whole tree was hung with strings of tiny lights and glittered softly from branch to branch, rather like a very enormous Christmas tree. Joe saw something else. It was a stout rope going from branch to branch for people to hold on to when they wished to go up the tree. Look at that, he said. It'll be much easier to go up tonight. All we'll have to do is just hold on to that rope, pull ourselves up by it. Come on. Other folk, and some animals too, were going up the tree, not to the land at the top, but to visit their friends who lived in the trunk of the enormous old tree. All the doors and windows were open now, and there was a great deal of laughing and talking going on. The children climbed up and up. When they came to the window of the pixie who had been so angry with them last week because they had peeped in, they found that he was in a very good temper now, sitting smiling at his open window, talking to 3 owls. But Joe didn't think they'd better stop, in case the pixie remembered them and threw water over them again. So on they went, holding onto the thick rope, climbing very easily. They came to Silky's house and called her. She was at her stove, baking something. "Hello," she said, looking up and smiling. "So here you are again. Just in time, too, because I'm baking pop cakes, and they are most delicious hot." Her silky golden hair stood out round her tiny face, which was red with baking. Joe took out his bag of toffee. "We're really taking them to Moonface," he said, "but do have one." Silky took one and then gave them 3 hot pop cakes each. My goodness, how lovely they were, especially when they went pop in the children's mouths. "We mustn't stop, Silky dear," said Beth. "We've still a long way to go up the tree." "Well, look out for Dame Washalot's washing water then," said Silky. "She's dreadful at night. She knows there are a lot of people up and down the tree, and she just loves to soak them with her dirty water." The children went on up. They passed Mr. What's-his-name, still fast asleep and snoring in his chair, and dodged Dame Washalot's water sloshing down. Nobody even got splashed this time, Franny laughed. "This really is the funniest tree I ever knew," she said. "You simply never know what's going to happen." They pulled themselves up and up by the rope and came at last to the top. They knocked on Moonface's yellow door. "Come in," yelled a voice, and in they went. Moonface was sitting on his curved bed, mending one of his cushions. "Hello," he said. "Did you bring me that toffee you owe me?" "Yes," said Joe, handing him the bag. "There's a lot there, Moonface. Half to pay you for last week's slippery slide, and half to pay you if you let us go down again tonight." "Oh my," said Moonface, looking with great delight into the bag. "What lovely toffee." He crammed 4 large pieces into his mouth and sucked with joy. "Is it nice?" said Beth. "Ubble, answered Moonface, quite unable to speak properly, for his teeth were all stuck together with the toffee. The children laughed. "Is the Roundabout land at the top of the faraway tree?" asked Joe. Moonface shook his head. "Ubble," he said. "What land is there now?" asked Franny. Moonface made a face and screwed up his nose. He said very earnestly. "Oh dear, we shan't be able to get anything out of him at all while he's eating toffee," said Beth. "He'll just ooble away. What a pity. I would have liked to know what strange land was there tonight." "I'll just go and peep," said Joe, jumping up. Moonface looked alarmed. He shook his head and caught hold of Joe. "Ooble," he cried. "It's all right, Moonface. I'm only going to peep," said Joe. "I shan't go into the land." "Ooble," cried Moonface in a fright, trying his best to swallow all the toffee so that he could speak properly. "Ooble!" Joe didn't listen. He went out of the door with the girls and climbed up the last branch of the faraway tree. What strange land was above it this time? Joe peered up through the dark hole in the cloud, through which a beam of moonlight shone down. He came to the little ladder that ran up the hole in the cloud. He climbed up. His head poked out into the land at the top. He gave a shout. "Beth, Franny, it's a kind of ice and snow. There are big white bears everywhere. Oh, do come and look." But then a dreadful thing happened. Something lifted Joe right off the ladder, and he disappeared into the land of ice and snow above the cloud. "Come back, Joe, come back," yelled Moonface, swallowing all his toffee in fright. "You mustn't even look, or the Snowman will get you." But Joe was gone. Beth looked at Moonface in dismay. "What shall we do?" she said. Chapter 8. Joe and the Magic Snowman. Moonface was most upset to see Joe disappear. "I told him not to, I told him," he groaned. "You didn't," sobbed Franny. "Your mouth was full of toffee and all you could say was ooble, and how could we know what that meant?" "Where's Joe now?" asked Beth, quite pale with shock. Yes, indeed, where was Joe? Someone had lifted him right off the ladder up into the land of ice and snow, and there, strangely enough, the moon and the sun were in the sky at the same time, one at one side and the other opposite, both shining with a pale light. Joe shivered, for it was very cold. He looked to see what had lifted him off the ladder, and he saw in front of him a big strange creature, a snowman. He was just like a snowman Joe had so often made in the winter time, round and fat and white, with an old hat stuck on his head and a carrot for a nose. "This is luck," said the snowman in a soft, snowy sort of voice. I've been standing by that hole for days, waiting for a seal to come up, and you came." "Oh," said Joe, remembering that seals came up to breathe through holes in the ice. "That wasn't a water hole. That was the hole that led down the faraway tree. I want to go back, please." "The hole has closed up," said the Snowman. Joe looked, and to his great dismay, he saw that a thick layer of ice had formed over the hole, so thick that he knew perfectly well he could never break through it. "Whatever shall I do now?" he said. "Just what I tell you," said the Snowman with a grin. "This is splendid. In this dull and silent land there is nothing but polar bears and seals and penguins. I've often wanted someone to talk to." "How did you get here?" asked Joe, wrapping his coat firmly around him, for he was bitterly cold. "Ah," said the Snowman, "that's a long story. I was made by some children long ago, and when they had finished me, they laughed at me and threw stones at me to break me up. So that night I crept away here and made myself king. What's the good of being king if you've only bears and things to talk to? What I really want is a good servant who can talk my language, and now you've come." "But I don't want to be your servant," said Joe indignantly. "Nonsense," said the Snowman, and he gave Joe a push that nearly sent him over. Then on big flat snow feet he moved forward to where there was a low wall of snow. "Make me a good house," he said. "I don't know how to," said Joe. "I'll just cut blocks of this stiff, icy snow and build them up on top of one another," said the Snowman. "When you've finished, I'll give you a warm coat to wear, then you won't shiver so much." Joe didn't see that he could do anything but obey, so he picked up a shovel that was lying by the wall and began to cut big bricks of the frozen snow. When he'd cut about 20, he stopped and placed them one on top of another till one side of the round house was made. Then he began to cut snow bricks again, wondering all the time how in the world he would ever be able to escape from this strange land. Joe had often built little snow houses of soft snow in his garden at home during the winter. Now he had made a big one with proper snow blocks as hard as bricks. He quite enjoyed it, though he did wish the girls were there too. When he had finished it and made a nice rounded roof, the Snowman came shuffling up. "Very nice," he said, "very nice indeed. I can just get in, I think." He squeezed his big snow body inside and threw out a thick coat for Joe, made of wool as soft and as white as the snow all around. Joe put it on very thankfully. Then he tried to squeeze in after the Snowman, for he wanted to be out of the cold, icy wind. But he was so squashed between the Snowman and the walls of the snow house that he couldn't breathe. "Don't push so," said the Snowman disagreeably. "Move up." "I can't," gasped poor Joe. He felt quite certain that he would be pushed right out of the snow hut through a hole in the wall. Just then there came a curious grunt at the doorway. The Snowman called out at once, "Is that you, Furry? Take this boy to your home under the ice. He's a nuisance here. He keeps squashing me." Joe looked up to see who Furry was, and he saw a great white bear looking in. The bear had a stupid but kind look on his face. "Oomph," said the bear, and he pulled Joe out into the open air. Joe knew it was no use to struggle. Nobody could get away from a bear as big as that. But the bear was certainly very kindly. "Oomph," he said to Joe with a loud grunting noise. "I don't know what you mean," said Joe. The bear said no more. He just took Joe along with him, half carrying the little boy, for Joe found the way very slippery indeed. They came to a hole that led under the ice and snow. The bear pushed Joe down it, and to Joe's enormous surprise, he found there was a big room underneath, with 5 bears there, big and little. It was quite warm there too. Joe was astonished, for there was no heater, of course. "Oomph," said all the bears politely. "Oomph," said Joe. That pleased the bears very much indeed. They came and shook paws with Joe very solemnly and oomphed all over him. Joe liked the look of the bears much more than he liked the look of the Snowman. He thought perhaps they might help him to escape from this silly land of ice and snow. "Could you tell me the way back to the faraway tree?" he asked the bears politely and clearly. The bears looked at one another and then oomphed at Joe. It was quite clear that they didn't understand a word he said. Never mind, said Joe with a sigh, and made up his mind to put up with things till he could see a way to escape. The Snowman was a great nuisance. No sooner did Joe settle himself down for a nap, leaning his head against the big warm body of a bear, than there came a call from the snow house. "Hey, boy, come here and play dominoes with me." So Joe had to go and play dominoes, and as the Snowman wouldn't let him come into the house because he said he was squashed, Joe had to sit at the doorway and play, and he nearly froze to bits. Then, another time, just as he was eating a nice bit of dried fish that one of the bears had kindly cooked for him, the Snowman shouted him to come and make him a window in his house. And Joe had to hurry off and cut a sheet of clear ice to fit into one side of the snow house for a window. Really, that Snowman was a perfect nuisance. I wish to goodness I'd never stepped into this silly land, thought Joe 100 times. It's a good thing the bears are so nice to me. I only wish they could say something else besides oomph. Joe wondered what Beth and Franny were doing. Were they very upset when he didn't come back? Would they go home and tell their father and mother what had happened? Beth and Franny were upset. It had been dreadful to see poor Joe disappear through the cloud like that. Moonface looked very solemn too. He could speak quite well now that he had swallowed all his toffee. "We must rescue him," he said, his face shining like the full moon. "How?" asked the girls. "I must think," said Moonface, and he shut his eyes. His head swelled up with his thinking. He opened his eyes and nodded his head. "We'll go to Goldilocks and the 3 bears," he said. "Her bears know the land of ice and snow. She might be able to help Joe that way." "Well, where does Goldilocks live?" asked Beth in wonder. "I thought she was just a fairy tale." "Good gracious, no," said Moonface. "Come on, we'll have to catch the train." "What train?" asked Franny in astonishment. "Oh, wait and see," said Moonface. "Hurry now. Go down the slippery slip and wait for me at the bottom."